We're on the second part of eukaryotic cells where we're going to talk about protozoa. And I wanted to remind you of the three domains, and we're talking about eukaryotes. And what the heck are protozoa? Well, they're not plants, they're not animals, they're not fungi. So here we got the prokaryotes. So they're not prokaryotes, they're eukaryotes. And they're not plants, animals, or fungi, but they're all these other things. They're all considered, actually, anyway, slime molds are kind of weird, but most of these other things are protozoa. But what's a better definition? Some of these protozoa are more closely related to plants. Some are more closely related to animals or fungi. There's no like one common ancestor. It still kind of is a group of organisms that we put in everything else that that doesn't really go in one of these other groups. And so you can see that that's why it's not just one group here that's called protozoa. So most are unicellular, but some will aggregate or form filaments, so some will cluster together. Some are autotrophs, some are heterotrophs. Some are more like plants. So here's a single celled, both of these actually, these single celled protozoa, they can actually swim around and they have chloroplasts. So they're autotrophs, meaning they can use photosynthesis. And others are heterotrophs, like this amoeba, and they have to feed on nutrients, organic compounds in the environment. So there's lots of different varieties. Many are parasites, meaning they have to live off of another organism and they cause damage to other organisms. I just thought here's some, different ones that you see in pond water. These are all really common. I love it when we find amoebas. There's apparently like amoebas everywhere, and they're even in your mouth, but I've never seen a mouth amoeba. But when we can find one, like in an environmental sample, I get all excited because they're just fun to look at. These look like blood cells because they are. And these things right here are some parasites in blood. So I think this one actually happens to be the parasite that causes malaria. So protozoa, they can move around different ways. And this is general things that you'll see is they can some move by cilia. And you've talked about cilia in other classes. Bacteria don't have cilia, but some eukaryotes do. And they're little hair-like structures that are on the surface and allow them to move around. Some, like amoebas, have pseudopods. And so what happens is the cytoplasm kind of flows, and it's going to flow out in this direction, and it's going to pull the organism in one, towards the pseudopods. And so those pseudopods are kind of oozing around and moving the organism that way. Pseudopods means false foot. So it's going to kind of ooze along a surface. And some protozoa have flagella, one or more long structure that allows them to swim. And it's really fun when you have a live lab and you can let students watch protozoa swimming around, and they move in so many different ways, and they're just fun to watch. So, and they're big because they're eukaryotes, so they're easy to see, and they're really good, a fun lab to do. What do they do in nature? What do protists or / protozoa do in nature? Well, they're found anywhere there's moisture, and there's lots of them. There's some that are planktonic, and when we talk about plankton or planktonic organisms, these are the ones that are floating. And a lot of those floating protists or protozoa are good food sources. And when I talk about food sources, we're talking about food sources for things like whales and all sorts of filter feeders or small organisms. But I like these graphs that I found. They're not from your book. I found them in some research article, but I thought it was really cool. This is gigatons of carbon, and this is marine biomass. So these are like all the living things in a marine environment, like in the ocean. And P for plankton, that means the ones that are floating, and as opposed to attached to a surface or moving on its own. But if you look here, the biggest biomass of organisms in the ocean is not things like fish and whales and whatnot. It is protists. So when you have like a blue whale, or like some of these whales are some of our hugest organisms on Earth, feed entirely on protists. They just filter feed the water and filter out these microscopic organisms. So the second largest biomass is bacteria, and then arthropods, things like insects and crabs and crayfish and shrimp and things like that. And then fish. So in the ocean, protists are the number one. On terrestrial biomass, on the land, plants have the greatest biomass. Then fungi and bacteria, but protists are up there. There's still a large biomass of protists. And when we think about, like the biomass of humans and animals, all this coming together, um, look at that compared to protists. So there are a lot of protists. They're really important in feeding other organisms. So they're a major source of food. The other thing is a lot of them are photosynthetic. They're autotrophs. They have chloroplasts and chlorophyll, and they provide about 70% of the oxygen on Earth. So we think about the trees and the plants providing oxygen, but actually the protists are really important. This is a really good argument for keeping our marine environments healthy, that we have good populations of the right kind of protists that will that will provide a healthy atmosphere. Let's see. When you look at protists, the two of the main stages you see a lot are trophozoite and cyst stages. So it turns out a lot of protists change as they develop. They change from one stage to another, and some can have these really complicated life cycles that they have, like maybe 5 different forms that they take. But two of the common forms that you'll see a lot are trophozoites, and that would be the motile feeding stage. And so all protists have to have that. All protists have like their stage that they're going to be just swimming around or sitting around if they don't swim, and acquiring food. So trophozoite is the motile feeding stage of all protozoa. And so a lot of them have these complex life cycles, some of which make cysts. And so a cyst is a hardy stage that survives better under stressful conditions, survives better than the trophozoite. So a cyst for a protozoan would be equivalent to an endospore for bacteria. Now, cysts tend to be easier to kill than endospores, but cyst is still kind of a more rugged version of that organism than the trophozoite. So here's one, Giardia. This is the trophozoite. This is the thing that swims around, that you might find in water, and if you drink it, you're going to get this really terrible diarrhea that comes and goes. And here's the cyst form. It just kind of stops, and that's the temporary form when things aren't going well. So this could end up in soil, and you could get exposed to it through soil, or this one is usually in water, and you could get exposed to it through drinking water. So protozoa can have like these many different stages. If you ever take a class in parasitology, you'll learn lots of different stages and try to understand, like, what does this organism look like in all these different stages. So I want to just give you a couple examples. Obviously, I can't do a lot on protozoa because I just don't have. It's not that kind of course, but I want to just give you some examples of diseases that are caused by protozoa, and malaria is one that we hear the most about. Malaria is caused by several species of Plasmodium, and it's the most common protozoan infection in the world, and it's spread by mosquitoes. Now, a lot of times I put a multiple choice question on a test, and I said, what's the cause of malaria? And people say mosquitoes, but mosquitoes just transfer the disease. The disease is actually caused by protozoans. And so here it's showing you that here's a human, and in their blood, they have this parasite. And these are some of the different stages. This is called sporozoites and schizonts. But there's these different stages of this malaria parasite, and it gets inside of someone's liver. And then it turns into another stage and it gets inside of the person's red blood cells. And now there's those trophozoites. And the trophozoites end up in the blood. And so that's what they're showing you here. There's these parasites in the blood. So it keeps changing form. And because that malaria parasite keeps changing form inside of the host, it's really hard for the immune system to respond to all those different varieties of forms and stop the disease. So this is something that can really become chronic. It can stay in people's blood. It can stay in people's liver. But you get these gametocytes in the blood. And what happens when a mosquito bites a person that has malaria? They pick up some of these parasites and they end up in the mosquito, ultimately end up in the mosquito's salivary glands. So when the mosquito goes to bite somebody, bite a different person, they actually regurgitate some of their saliva into the person. And along with that come the malaria parasites. So the malaria parasites or plasmodium does not kill the mosquito, but it can have a devastating impact on the human host. People with malaria often experience fever, chills, and flu-like illness. If left untreated, they can have complications and die. So this is something that can be really serious. Oh, one of the things I wanted to point out, I put here that the mosquito that does this is called the Anopheles mosquito. And that's a mosquito that's not everywhere. One of the things we worry about with climate change is increasing the range of this mosquito. Malaria is typically spread in tropical areas or very warm areas. As the climate warms, if we spread the Anopheles mosquito, we can also spread the parasite that's in the mosquito, the plasmodium that causes malaria. So malaria can be a really devastating disease. Data I got from 2020, there's estimated to be 241 million cases of malaria worldwide, and 627,000 people died, mostly children in sub-Saharan Africa. About 2,000 cases of malaria are diagnosed in the US each year, and probably most, if not all of those people, most of those people have acquired it in places other than the US. How do you avoid malaria? Well, the best way to avoid malaria is to avoid mosquitoes. And so they're showing you here some of the parasites in the blood. And one of the common things that's done by aid agencies that are trying to help people reduce malaria is distributing just mosquito netting, a net that you can put over your bed because the mosquitoes tend to be more prevalent at night or at dawn and dusk. And the mosquito netting can prevent exposure to mosquitoes, which can prevent the exposure to plasmodium and the prevention of malaria. It was eradicated in 1951 by the use of DDT. So we got rid of the mosquitoes that kill, that cause malaria in the US, but just by using chemicals to kill mosquitoes, but also by reducing water, like drainage ditches where water accumulates and mosquitoes can multiply, and the use of window screens, reducing the amount of mosquitoes in our houses. Another disease caused by protozoa that you'll see in the US, I wanted to give you some examples of protozoal diseases you'll see in the US, trichomoniasis and toxoplasmosis. So trichomoniasis is one of these diseases that you think you've never heard of, but you might have. It's caused by an organism called Trichomonas vaginalis. If you look at these cells, they might look familiar. They might look like the cheek cells that we looked at in lab. And they are because they're epithelial cells. But these happen to be epithelial cells from a woman's vagina. And these cells are some of these Trichomonas vaginalis parasites that are also there. This is the most common curable, meaning non-viral, sexually transmitted disease in the US. And there are about 3.5 million cases per year. This is really common as far as STDs are concerned. This is that disease that eh, that causes that itchiness. I'm going to go into the signs and symptoms in the next slide, but this is actually quite common. You might hear it called trick. Men with trichomoniasis may notice itching and irritation inside the penis, burning after urination or ejaculation, discharge from the penis. When you get that STD talk and it's talking about, burning when you urinate, itching, secretions, this is the classic organism that can cause that. In women, you can get itching and burning redness, soreness of the genitals, discomfort when urination, changes in the vaginal discharge, like a fishy smell. It can be unpleasant to have sex. And if it's not treated, it can last months or years. And there are oral antibiotics. It's relatively easy to treat this, but if you don't get it treated, you're easily reinfected. So you have to remember for both partners to be treated. But this is really common, but go to the doctor, get an antibiotic, and it also is easily treated. It actually is one of the more common STDs in older people. So if older people who are sexually active. So it's not just young folks. So the other protozoan disease I wanted to mention that's relatively that we know of in the U.S. That I don't know, it's not that common, but it does occur in the U.S. Is toxoplasmosis, and you might hear it called toxo or toxoplasma. It's caused by an organism called Toxoplasma gondii, and the reason toxoplasmosis is an infection caused by a single cell protozoan called Toxoplasma gondii. While the parasite is found throughout the world, more than 40 million people in the US may be infected with this. It doesn't mean you're sick. It doesn't mean you're at risk for anything, and you might not even know you have it. But it can persist for long periods of time and possibly even last a lifetime. So, how do you get this? Like, how do all these people get this illness? Well, there's cysts that occur in feces, and a lot of times, like where we hear about it is you're told pregnant women are told don't handle cat litter because cats can be killing rodents. And so rodents are a common place where you might find this organism. You might find the cysts in the feces of mice or associated with mice, possibly other animals. And so what happens is the cat kills the mouse, and the cat gets exposed to this organism, and will have these toxoplasma in its feces. And so when the cat defecates into the cat litter, and cat litter is not the only place. I mean, it can come from food that's been exposed to contaminated soil. But the one that we hear the most about is cats that go in the cat litter, and then a person changes the cat litter. It's an oral transmission, so you'd have to not wash your hands and get some of it in your mouth. So make sure you wash your hands after handling your cat or after handling cat litter. But what can happen is a woman can become infected, and again, most of the time it's no big deal. But every once in a while, when a pregnant woman becomes infected and they actually have toxoplasmosis, they might show signs of a flu-like symptoms, swollen lymph nodes, headache, fever. So when a pregnant woman has these symptoms, you want to go talk to your doctor and say, have you been handling cat litter? Now, if you're just like somebody walking down the street, you're not pregnant, you're not planning on becoming pregnant, and you get this and it goes away, I wouldn't worry about it. But for somebody who's pregnant and you get these kind of signs and symptoms, you might want to talk to your doctor because they might want to test you for toxoplasmosis. You say, yeah, I have cats, I've been handling cats. According to March of Dimes, where I got the data, 400 to 4,000 babies are born each year in the U.S. Oh, each year. I think these were U.S. data. with toxoplasmosis. So babies can be born with this. This can cause miscarriages and birth defects, and some of these birth defects are very serious, like fluid on the brain that can cause brain damage and can cause permanent damage in a child. It can cause miscarriage. So you want to be careful. I think when you're pregnant, you just tell the people in your household that I'm not changing the cat litter for the next 9 months. And that's a probably it's just a good safety thing, and why not? You get it's kind of nice not to have to change the cat litter for 9 months, but the likelihood you're going to get it is relatively low, but it does happen. And when you do handle your cat or cat litter and you're pregnant, make sure you wash your hands. That's all I'm going to talk about with protozoa.